How is it that some fighters are able to move with grace and ease across the floor while others are always stumbling over themselves? Why is it that some people are always at exactly the right range while others are constantly never in quite the right spot to deliver an effective technique? And how is it that some people are always exactly where they need to be while others are constantly struggling for position? These are the questions that we're going to be exploring in today's workshop, which will help you become a smooth and mobile fighter. My name is John O'Roach. I'm the founder of Fight Like Fiore. Welcome to my workshop on footwork. Today we'll be touching on a curriculum which is part of a process that helps you move as a fighter with a lot of grace and ease and speed when you're sparring with people. In particular, what we'll be looking at today is footwork and how that helps improve your sparring, because footwork is a really critical skill, and I noticed that a lot of people struggle with their footwork and are not able to do it especially as well as they would like, and certainly as well as they could. So it's such a foundational thing. This is really why I've picked this as one of the workshops. Good footwork will really make a vast improvement to your sparring overall, because it just gets you where you need to go smoothly and quickly and easily, and in a manner that sort of hides your movements from your opponent as well. Even despite the fact that you're standing right in front of them, you become somewhat invisible. You're able to move and shift without them knowing what you're doing or how it is that you're getting to be there. So it's important. One of the reasons why I've developed a curriculum is that it's important to pay attention to what I would call basic training and basic fundamentals. If you don't do this, it leads to a lot of frustration. There's a lot of people, and you might sort of fallen into this trap where you go, well, what I'm really aiming to do is to improve my sparring. So what I'll do is I'll practice more sparring and then I'll get better at it. I would very strongly advocate not to do this. I don't think it's a particularly good way to learn or practice. It's a slow and frustrating road if you go down there. Probably fun, but not very effective. So this is why I've developed a curriculum and why the curriculum works in the way that it does. Sparring it's a very complex thing to do. You've got a ton of distancing and mobility issues. You need to maintain constant cover. This is all before you even deliver an attack towards your opponent, and it all has to happen at extremely high speed. There's just too much going on to launch into it and expect to get a decent result. You need a structured approach that breaks this down into a series of fundamental steps, and you work on each step individually, all of these basic techniques, and then slowly build all of those techniques up. So you've got a series of basic techniques, starting to apply a few of them here, and sparring's at the tippy top of the triangle. You're not going to jump all that way in a single move. Your sparring will never ever be better than your capacity to perform basic techniques, and footwork is a foundational technique. If you can't do it, your sparring will never really improve. If you use a curriculum and a structured approach to building your techniques and to building your skill sets, you'll ultimately save time. You'll get much better results. So that's why I've developed this curriculum, because I see a lot of fighters get sidetracked trying to jump straight into sparring and neglecting their basic techniques, or not understanding them, or even often actually not even being really taught them especially well. And it leads to, it's a slow and it's a frustrating path. So that's how this particular curriculum is designed to work. That's how this particular curriculum is designed to work. It breaks everything down into little structured components, and each of these skill sets build on each other to help you get your ultimate goal of sparring well and quickly and smoothly. I've put together a simple PDF to help get the most out of this workshop today. So go to pause the video, there should be a download section here. You can download this PDF and then you'll have something to take notes on and something to help you retain the information that we've got out of this workshop today. So let's get into it. We'll be training out the back today. Footwork. So here we are on the back deck. This is where I do a lot of my training at home. If you're part of the membership, you'll get to know this space quite well. What I particularly like about it is that it's got all the lines on the pavers, so you've got lots of lines going this way, lots of lines going that way, and it's pretty clear. 45-degree angles as well, so you get really good sense of angles and depth of stances and width of stances and things like that. It's really nice to coordinate your footwork on a pattern floor like this. So if you've got a pattern floor of some description, floorboards, pavers, even lines on concrete, they're really good to use. Okay, so what we're really here to talk about is footwork. So Fiore mentions four steps and 3 turns. He kind of cheats a little bit because he really only gives you 2 steps and then says you can do them going forwards and do them going backwards, and he calls it 4. But anyway, let's take a look. We'll begin with the stance that you want to take, and then move on to steps. Start with your feet shoulder width apart, and then move your feet so that when you drop down on one knee, your knee of the back leg lines up to the heel of the front leg. Right, that's how far apart you want your feet to be. Have your hips pointing out at 45 degrees that way. And you want to get up on the balls of your toes and drop your weight. Bend your knees and drop your weight. Your toes are just hidden, like when your back's straight and your head's up and your glance down. From my eyes to my knees to my toes is a straight line, so I just can't quite see my toes. Same on the back foot. And that's a nice sort of indication of the amount that you need to bend your knees. Alright, lift your toes up there. And this is a reasonably open kind of stance, and it gives you a lot of hip mobility this way, which will generate a lot of power in what you're doing. Also gives you a lot of stability, so that if you start pushing or shoving or crashing into your into your opponent, you're not going to get pushed off balance. Right? You're stable, both from side to side and from front to back. A really narrow stance like this is great for moving forward in a straight line, but if you want to turn or if you get pushed off to the side, you've really got not a great deal there, and it's easy to lose your balance in that direction. So a wider stance gives you greater stability and more scope for movement around the other person. So looking from the front, it'll look something like this, and from the side, it'll be looking like this. When you're practicing your footwork, it's best just to tuck your hands out of the way. A lot of beginners tend to hold a weapon or wave their arms around to keep their balance. Just keep them tucked right out of the way. Your hands are not a part of this. It's nice to be able to practice your footwork without your hands having any engagement whatsoever, and then that way you're training your legs to do their own thing, and you coordinate your arm movements with them at a later stage. Alright, let's move on to 4 steps. So the first step that Fiore talks about is passing, and this is about as simple as it gets. That's a pass. Important to remember that you're not walking, okay? You're not doing this. You've got to keep your legs bent, and you've got to keep your your hips as a level platform, and that's really the key to everything that we're doing with footwork. Your hips are a nice level platform and they just glide around. All the fighting happens from this stable platform. If you're walking and it's moving up and down, then first of all you're telling your opponent everything that you're doing because they can watch you move, and second of all you don't have a stable platform to fight from. So keep your legs bent, track things with your eyes, look at anything in the far distance, anything in the mid distance, and then see how they move relative to each other. If you're moving up and down as you step through, you'll see those things moving relative to each other. But if you're gliding along, all those things should stay nice and level to each other. Okay? And the key to making this happen is to keep your knees always bent and stay up on your toes all the time. You'll get sore thighs doing this. Alright, so hands tucked away, and for passing, just step through like this. With each change, notice that my hips will move to a different direction. Now they're facing off that way, and this way, so forwards. And this natural movement of the hip will generate a lot of power as you step through, and that'll add a lot of hip power to whatever technique that you're using as you incorporate it into your step. Alright, so moving forward, and the same thing to move backwards. It's just the same thing. Fiore gives it Fiore says it's returning, calls it a different step, but really it's the same thing, you're just moving in a different direction. So the principle's still the same. Keep your eyes tracking in the distance there, so your head stays still, your hips are still, your spine's upright, and you're just moving backwards to this. Check your distance every now and then, and if you've got lines on the floor, which really helps, check the width of your stance as well, so that it's not sneaking in, getting overly narrow, or they usually tend to get more narrow than too wide, but check it, stop every few steps and check your feet. Are you still in the same, are your feet moving down the same lines? Have you got your distance correct? Always stop and have a look. Alright, so that's passing and returning. He also talks about increasing and decreasing. These are fairly straightforward moves. So this is an increase. Right, your front foot just shuffles out some, and your back foot catches up. So whether you just do a little fairly small movement like this, or whether it's a long lunge, is dependent on the context, but that's what you're doing, front, back. And again, you want to keep your hips level, and to do this you want to track with your eyes so you're not jumping like this. It's a smooth movement. And when you get to move smoothly, it will hide your movements from your opponent. It's a way to be somewhat invisible. When you're standing in front of someone, you can hide what you're doing a lot with clever movement. If you've got stable hips, your feet are able to move without your body showing what's going on, and that brings a whole ton of advantages, which we'll touch on lightly here. The opposite of that is decreasing, and it's really the same thing. Here you just shuffle that foot back and then slide your front one to catch up in the other direction. Okay. Forward, back, and so on. Okay, So that's passing and returning, increasing and decreasing. Pretty simple stuff. There's a few variations on that which are nice to explore, so I'll take a quick look at those. You can do a sliding step, which is sort of a variation on a pass, where you slide your front foot back a little and then step through. So, like that. This is nice to do when you're in close. Partly it just adjusts your distancing. It allows you to get a step through without overrunning what you need, the place that you need to be. Okay, you can make a step, but without gaining a tremendous amount of distance. It's nice to. I also like to use this kind of thing from a decrease, and then a sliding step. And that's a nice way to sort of draw your opponent in and then drop one in on them, and change that dynamic of movement between you and your partner. So there's a few different ways you can use this. It's just a nice thing to play around with, but that's a sliding step. Drop this back, step through. If you want to exaggerate this movement slightly, you can step right back here, and you can see I'm quite overbalanced now, and you quite fall into it. This gives you real explosive movement on the step through. So there's a subtle difference between a fairly short and quite a long shuffle step there. One's more about making a fairly nuanced definition of your distance. The other's about explosive force. Third slight variation that you'll get on this, and Fiore talks about passing off the line quite a lot. Actually, it's without going too far down that track, the universal defence, he'll pass off the line and then step through to make a move. So in this way, rather than sliding your foot back necessarily, it's off to the side. So now you've got a really wide stance. I'll show you this from the front, because this is where it really demonstrates it. You slide offline, and now my hips are pointing straight forward, and then step through. So for instance, when you're breaking the thrust or any sort of variation on that, step off and pass through. And what this really does, this step off here, your hips are so open now, you get a ton of hip action here. You get enormous amounts of power and drive to really, whatever's coming towards you, you've got a ton of momentum and torque to really smash that offline, and then come through to make your own counter attack of whatever description fits the context there. So that's stepping offline is a variation of that sliding step. So just to give you the three of those: short slide will adjust your distance, a long slide will give you quite a bit of explosive power, and stepping off the line will really open your hips up and give you a lot of torque there. So three variations on that. The other thing that I would like to discuss briefly is a shuffle step, which is rather similar to just increasing and decreasing, except instead of going front back, you're just going back front. That's all it is. If you string them all together, you can't really tell the difference between a shuffle step and an increase. So, like so. Right, and if I was to do a bunch of them really quickly, it would be like that. It just gives you the scope to move in on your opponent without really and hide your movement, right? You're just that much closer and you really haven't given it away that you're advancing towards them. And then you make up your distance here. Same thing moving backwards, shuffle back. And this, again, it's all about keeping your hips still and just gliding around and hiding what you're doing through this stable platform. This gliding action will hide your movements from your opponent and allow you to stand in front of someone and still be invisible. That's a real key that you want to play around with. So, what have we got? That's actually, that's quite a few steps, isn't it? So, passing, returning, increasing, decreasing, sliding step, short sliding step, long sliding step, stepping off the line, shuffle step, and a shuffle step backwards. That's footwork in a nutshell. There's any number of ways you can play around with it, but those steps are basically what we'll be playing around with. While we're here, we might as also talk about turns, because they're all sort of bundled together. Okay. So, first turn, mezzo volte, really simple, it's a pass. There you go, we've just discussed those. That's what that is, mezzo volte. Volta stabile, which is a bit more interesting. You're here, facing in that direction. Your feet don't move. You're up on the balls of your toes, so your balls of your toes are just like pivot points. And all you do is you twist your hips, your weight is evenly distributed here. You just pivot around the axis of your spine. Now I'm facing that direction. With a wide stance, you're not going to make it fully 180 degrees, you make it about 135. So you've gone 1, 2, 3/4 of a circle. If you've got a really narrow stance, you can do this fully the other way. But if you're making turns like that, then you really don't want to have a narrow stance to do it, because there's obviously a reason why you would be wanting to shift from one direction to another. Keep a wide stance, go 3/8 of a circle, and if you want to go any further, then you've got to start moving your feet. So that's a volta stabile. From here, turn, but again, your knees are bent, you can't see your toes, your hips are still, basically they're at the same level, and everything just spins around the axis. Your spine is just like a big column that runs down through the center of your weight distribution, and everything just pivots around that. Alright? Facing this way, and again, just using my hands as a little indicator of where the hips are pointing, and they're over there. So we'll call this the front. Now they've gone 3 clicks round, back, so on. Okay? That's volta stabile. The last turn that Fiore discusses is the full turn. So this is basically, he describes it as moving one foot around the other, and he doesn't really describe exactly. It's another one of those situations where it sort of seems to depend on context that everybody understood at the time, that he's not going to go and elaborate on. He doesn't describe how far you turn, so technically you could argue that is a tuta volta. Oh, hey dog, get in. Training with a dog is in no way going to help your martial arts, I might as well point out, but they're just good for your mental health. Where were we? Full turns, tuta volta, okay. That's pivoting around a foot, but it's a fairly poor argument. Really, the clue's right there in the name, tutor, full, it's a full turn. So essentially what you're doing is a pass through and a volte stabile. To really make a full turn though, you're going to have to not step through to here, but step through all the way over here, and then pivot on this, and then pivot so you're facing back 180 degrees to where you've come from. So do that again. Feet, knees bent, weight low, balls of your toes. That's your pivot point. Step through, turn. Alright, step through, turn. That's 2 to volte. So, there we've got it. 4 steps, plus a bunch of others, and 3 turns. That's your footwork. Everything else depends on that. Footwork's really important because it's the basis of everything else that you do, really. You know, if your footwork's not up to par, then you're in a lot of trouble. So I'd advocate spending a lot of time playing around with that. But that's the nutshell version of what we'll be looking at with footwork. Okay. So today we looked at footwork and its application in sparring. In the next video, what I'd like to zero in on is how you can use your footworks and how you can use your hips in the universal defense. This is a key movement throughout Fiore's work, and understanding the universal defense is really key to understanding Armizare. It's the classic Fiore process of taking a fairly simple principle and applying it across absolutely everything that he does. It comes up in all weapon systems, and it's a really good thing to know. So that's what we'll be looking at in the next video. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you got out of today's workshop. How would your sparring improve if you're able to move smoothly across the floor? And how does your improved footwork help you out there? So let me know in the comments. I'll read all that I can find and I'll respond to all that I can. Footwork is a fairly simple process, really. As you saw, there's not a great deal to it, but it's certainly reliant on a lot of repetition. The ideas are fairly straightforward, but you just need to practice them over and over and over until they just happen without having to give them any thought whatsoever. They're a real game changer in your sparring. Once you're able to have good, clean, fast, smooth footwork, everything picks up. A small improvement in your footwork will really raise your sparring capabilities tremendously. So what we've covered today will really help put you on that path. So like I said, in the next video we'll be looking at the universal defense. I can't wait to see you there.